The rapture cope is just too good, the truth they don't want you to know. Let me say something that might sound uncomfortable at first, but please hear me all the way through. There is a version of the rapture message that feels incredibly soothing. It calms fears, removes urgency, and makes spiritual vigilance seem unnecessary. It tells people everything will be fine no matter how they live, as long as they believe the right things. And because it feels gentle and reassuring, many believers have embraced it without realizing what it's doing to their hearts. I call it the rapture cope. It's the idea that readiness is automatic, that devotion can wait, that obedience is optional, because grace will cover the gap. It sounds merciful, it sounds loving, it sounds like peace. But here's the problem: Jesus never taught the rapture as a safety net for careless faith. He never described it as an escape from responsibility, and he certainly never warned us less because he wanted us comfortable. In fact, most of Jesus' strongest warnings weren't aimed at people who rejected God. They were aimed at people who were confident they were fine, people who assumed they were ready, people who believed proximity was the same as intimacy, and belief was the same as obedience. This message isn't about attacking hope. It's about rescuing it from distortion, because false comfort is far more dangerous than honest fear. And what Jesus actually taught about readiness isn't harsh, it's loving. It's meant to wake us up before we confuse familiarity with faith and comfort with truth. So don't listen casually, don't listen defensively, listen honestly, because the rapture cope is just too good to be true. And what Jesus really said is far more serious and far more hopeful than most people have been told. Part 1. The most dangerous lie is the one that feels loving. Not every lie announces itself as evil. Some lies arrive quietly, wrapped in compassion, understanding, and reassurance. They don't provoke alarm, they soothe it. They don't confront the heart, they calm it. And because of that, they are far more dangerous than lies that sound aggressive or extreme. A lie that feels loving is the hardest to detect, because it rarely meets resistance. This is exactly why the rapture cope is so powerful. It doesn't deny Jesus. It doesn't reject Scripture. It doesn't openly contradict faith. Instead, it softens the sharp edges of Jesus' warnings until they no longer cut. It takes the urgency out of his words and replaces it with comfort. It reframes vigilance as anxiety, watchfulness as obsession, and readiness as something optional rather than essential. The cope tells believers that everything will be fine simply because they believe the right things, that spiritual alertness is unnecessary, that devotion can wait, that obedience is secondary because grace will always fill the gap. And because this message feels merciful, many accept it without question. But Jesus never warned people who were openly rejecting God. He warned people who were confident they belonged to him. He warned servants who assumed their master would be delayed. He warned virgins who assumed they could prepare later. He warned guests who assumed attendance was enough. In every case, the issue was not unbelief. It was assumption, familiarity without intimacy, confidence without formation, belief without obedience. This is what makes the cope so deceptive. It doesn't sound like rebellion. It sounds like rest. It doesn't feel like compromise. It feels like relief. It convinces people that examining their lives is unnecessary because their theology already assures them. Comfort becomes destructive when it replaces discernment, when it convinces people they no longer need to ask hard questions, when it trains hearts to relax spiritually, at the very moment Jesus calls them to stay awake. And perhaps the most subtle danger of all is how the cope uses the language of grace. Grace becomes permission to delay change. Mercy becomes justification for drift. Love becomes a reason to avoid discomfort. But Jesus never used grace to cancel vigilance. He used grace to empower transformation. He never offered peace without alignment. He never promised comfort without calling for surrender. The cope produces believers who are confident but unexamined, secure but unformed, certain yet spiritually shallow. People who know the language of faith, but have stopped letting faith reshape their daily lives. And this is where the real danger emerges. People stop asking the most important questions, not do I believe, but am I being shaped? Not am I saved, but am I awake? Not do I know Jesus, but is Jesus actively forming me? Because faith that is never tested by obedience is faith that has never been prepared for endurance. And Jesus warned us that the final moment would expose that difference with terrifying clarity. The rapture cope does not prepare people to meet Jesus, it prepares them to be surprised by him. Part 2. Why the cope spreads faster than the call to readiness. If we're honest, the cope spreads because it asks very little and promises a great deal. It allows people to feel secure without changing how they live. It offers reassurance without requiring surrender. It gives relief without demanding responsibility. And in a world already exhausted, anxious and overwhelmed, that kind of message feels like a lifeline. The call to readiness is very different. It costs comfort. It costs excuses. It costs delay. It forces people to take responsibility for their spiritual condition instead of outsourcing it to timing, theology, or assumptions. It invites self-examination. It challenges habits. It confronts priorities. It asks people to live intentionally instead of passively. And because of that, it often feels heavy. So people naturally gravitate toward the message that feels lighter. The cope tells believers they don't need to worry about drifting. That spiritual sleep is normal. That urgency is unhealthy. That watchfulness leads to burnout. It reframes devotion as extremism and obedience as legalism. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, believers begin to lower their guard, not because they stop believing, but because they stop paying attention. Jesus understood this tendency deeply. That's why he spoke so often about staying awake. Sleep does not happen instantly. It happens gradually. A little distraction, a little compromise, a little comfort, a little delay, and before you realize it, vigilance is gone. The cope thrives in that environment. It says, you've done enough, you're tired. God understands, and while God is compassionate, Jesus never said understanding replaces obedience. He never said exhaustion justifies neglect. He never said familiarity equals intimacy. The cope promises peace by removing tension. Jesus offers peace by restoring alignment. The cope lowers the standard so people can relax. Jesus reshapes the heart, so rest becomes genuine, not shallow. And here is a truth many people don't want to confront. The cope often spreads fastest in religious spaces, among people who know the scriptures, who know the vocabulary, who know how to sound confident. It doesn't primarily target unbelievers. It targets believers who are weary, distracted, and longing for reassurance more than refinement. That's why Jesus didn't tell the world to stay awake. He told his followers, because the greatest danger to faith is not persecution. It is complacency, not opposition, but assumption. Not hatred, but drift. A slow numbing of urgency that feels harmless until it is complete. The cope spreads because it feels easier now, but what feels easier in the present often demands a far greater cost later. And Jesus, in his love, refused to make readiness easy at the expense of truth. He warned us not to frighten us, but to form us, not to burden us, but to prepare us. Awake, not anesthetized. Faithful, not merely reassured. And that is the deep, uncomfortable difference between the cope and the call to readiness. Part 3. What Jesus actually warned us about, and why it ruins the cope. If the rapture cope were true, the teachings of Jesus about the end would sound very different. They would be simpler, softer, less demanding. They would focus mainly on reassurance, not readiness. But when you actually read the words of Jesus without filtering them through comfort, a clear and unsettling pattern emerges. Jesus' strongest warnings are not aimed at atheists, mockers, or outsiders. They are aimed at people who believed they were already safe. He spoke to servants who assumed their master was taking too long, not rebels, servants, people who belonged to the household, people who had responsibility. And the problem wasn't that they stopped believing the master would return. The problem was that delay changed how they lived. They relaxed their vigilance. They shifted their priorities. They assumed time was on their side. He spoke to virgins waiting for the bridegroom. All of them believed. All of them waited. All of them waited. All of them expected to enter. But only some prepared for delay. Only some carried oil beyond the moment. Only some lived as if the wait might be longer than expected. He spoke to people who said his name confidently, who expected recognition, who were shocked when intimacy was missing. Not because they were pretending, but because they confused familiarity with relationship. These warnings are devastating to the cope because they reveal something crucial. Belief alone is not the focus of Jesus' concern. Formation is. Jesus did not warn us about missing information. He warned us about dull hearts. He did not say many would fail because they misunderstood prophecy. He said many would fail because they stopped watching. They grew comfortable. They assumed proximity was enough. The cope tells people that warnings like these are extreme, symbolic, or meant only for a specific group. Jesus presents them as universal and urgent. He repeats them in different forms because he knows how easily humans reinterpret truth to protect comfort. And this is the part people don't like to hear. Jesus never reassured spiritual sleep. He confronted it. He never excused drift. He exposed it. He never told people they would wake up just in time. He warned that sleep itself was the danger. The cope survives by reframing Jesus as gentler than he actually was about readiness. But the real Jesus is not harsh, he is honest. And honesty feels uncomfortable when it interrupts false peace. What Jesus warned about was not fear, persecution, or chaos. He warned about assumption, about delay, about confidence without vigilance, about faith that stops responding to conviction because it feels secure. That warning dismantles the cope completely. Because if Jesus was serious, then readiness matters now, not later. If Jesus meant what he said, then formation cannot be postponed. And if Jesus was right, then comfort without transformation is not mercy, it is deception. The cope tells people they are safe because they believe. Jesus warns people to examine whether belief is actively shaping their lives. And that difference changes everything. Part 4. The truth they don't want you to know about readiness. Here is the truth that makes the Rapture cope so attractive and so dangerous. Readiness cannot be rushed. It cannot be borrowed. It cannot be switched on at the last moment. And deep down, people know this, which is why they avoid thinking about it. Spiritual formation is slow, quiet, often invisible. It happens in ordinary moments, not dramatic ones. It happens in how you respond to conviction when no one is watching. In what you do with temptation when it would be easier to justify it. In how you prioritize prayer, obedience and humility when life feels normal and unthreatening. The cope says you will feel urgency when it matters. Jesus says urgency arrives too late, if formation never happened. The cope says God understands delay. Jesus says delay is exactly how hearts grow dull. The cope says belief guarantees readiness. Jesus says readiness is revealed by endurance. This is why the truth is rarely preached clearly, because it removes comfort. It removes excuses. It forces people to ask whether their confidence is rooted in genuine relationship or simply religious routine, and that question is unsettling. Readiness is not about perfection. It is about responsiveness. A ready heart responds quickly to conviction. A ready heart respends without bargaining. A ready heart stays soft, alert and teachable. Not frantic, but focused. Not fearful, but faithful. The cope creates people who are calm but unresponsive, confident but resistant, certain but unchanged. It replaces spiritual sensitivity with reassurance. Over time, people stop noticing conviction. They stop responding quickly. They stop examining themselves honestly. And the danger is not that God stops speaking. The danger is that hearts stop listening. Jesus warned that the final moment would expose this difference instantly, not cruelly, clearly. Those who lived responsive lives will recognize him immediately. Those who delayed response will experience shock, not because God was unfair, but because they mistook comfort for preparation. The truth they don't want you to know is this: readiness is formed long before urgency arrives. Peace in that moment is not created by last-minute belief. It is the fruit of a life that stayed awake while waiting, and that truth shortens the cope, because it puts responsibility back where Jesus always placed it, on the heart, the habits, and the daily choices of those who claim to follow him. That's why the cope is popular, and that's why Jesus' words remain uncomfortable, because real readiness cannot be outsourced. It must be lived. Part 5. Why real hope is stronger than the cope, and why it demands more of us. Here is where everything turns, and where many people misunderstand the heart of Jesus most deeply. Rejecting the rapture cope does not destroy hope. It restores it. In fact, the cope only exists because people are afraid that real hope might be too demanding, too costly, or too uncomfortable. But what Jesus offers is not fragile hope that needs comfort to survive. It is resilient hope, hope that is strong enough to live awake. The cope offers reassurance by lowering expectations. Jesus offers assurance by transforming the heart. The cope says, "Don't worry, you shall be fine." Jesus says, "Follow me and you will have life." Those are not the same message. Real hope is not built on escape. It is built on relationship. It does not depend on avoiding responsibility. It grows stronger through obedience. The believer who lives ready is not anxious. They are peaceful, not because they assume safety, but because their life is aligned with Jesus. This is something the cope cannot produce. The cope creates calm by numbing urgency. Real hope creates peace by resolving tension. When your life is aligned with Christ, you don't need constant reassurance. You don't need to argue with warnings. You don't need to soften Jesus' words. You recognize them as loving guidance, not threats. A ready believer does not live in fear of the end. They live in anticipation of meeting someone they know. They don't panic at warnings because warnings confirm what they are already practicing. Their hope does not rest on timing, theology, or assumptions. It rests on trust cultivated through daily faithfulness. This is why Jesus warned us so often, not to frighten us but to form us. He wanted followers who were awake, not alarmed, steady, not scrambling, faithful, not frantic. The cope weakens faith by removing urgency. Truth strengthens faith by giving it direction. The cope produces believers who are calm but shallow. Real hope produces believers who are calm because they are rooted, and rooting takes time. It takes intention. It takes humility. It takes a willingness to let Jesus disrupt comfort in order to deepen love. The cope tells people, relax. Jesus says, remain. And remaining is not passive. It is active dependence. It is choosing faithfulness when no one is watching. It is responding to conviction instead of silencing it. It is living as though Jesus' words are true, not just comforting. That kind of hope does not need denial to survive. It can face reality honestly and still stand. Conclusion: don't trade comfort for truth, or reassurance for readiness. The rapture cope is just too good, because it promises everything and asks almost nothing. And that is how you know it is not the message Jesus preached. Jesus never promised comfort without cost. He never offered assurance without transformation. He never told his followers to relax when he told them to stay awake. His warnings were not threats. They were invitations to live alert, responsive, and aligned with him. This message is not about fear. It is about honesty. It is about refusing to trade vigilance for reassurance. It is about rejecting a version of hope that dulls the spirit instead of strengthening it. It is about letting Jesus' words confront us instead of reinterpreting them to protect our comfort. Don't settle for a faith that only soothes you. Don't settle for a hope that asks nothing of you. Don't settle for comfort if it costs you readiness. Real hope does not tell you everything will be fine, no matter how you live. Real hope invites you to live in a way that is ready whenever the moment comes. Stay awake. Stay responsive. Stay humble. Not because you are afraid of missing Jesus, but because you long to meet him without shock, without regret, and without confusion. The quote tells you to relax. Jesus calls you to remain faithful. And that call, though demanding, is the most loving thing he could ever give.